So without further ado, let's get into tonight's subject matter. We are in hurricane season officially. We're also in a heightened wildfire season. We always have, unfortunately, see tornadoes from time to time, which can lead to response, but that's actually, never mind, tornadoes don't matter as much in this, because there is also a pandemic going on, and I'm here to tell you that your ESD is not alone. The Texas Intrastate Fire Mutual Aid System, TIFMAS, it can give you the help you need if your ESD is overwhelmed. Here tonight to talk about TIFMAS is Chief Carter Johnson of Montgomery County ESD number 6 and Chief J.J. Wittig of Travis County ESD number 3. These chiefs are regional coordinators for TIFMAS. Chief Wittig has been at many of our conferences, a couple in the years past, presenting on TIFMAS. And I'm just going to let you guys take it away. Chief Wittig, I think you're going to start us off, so go ahead.
Great, I am indeed. Good evening, everyone. While I may not be able to see you on my screen, I'll that you're out there and hopefully you're smiling and not scowling at us this evening. We've just got a kind of a short presentation to make to you, just a kind of a brief introduction of what the TIFMAS program is, not only how you can utilize it or how it may be useful to your local jurisdiction, but also how you can participate in it. That's one of the things about, as you know, about the fire service statewide is, as well as receiving the help when we need it, we're certainly first in line to be giving it back when we have the opportunity. So hopefully you should be seeing the slides on your screen now. And that's just our intro slide, so we can move on into the next one. Again, just a brief history of our history of the TIFMAS program. It was created by state law back in 2007. And within a year, in 2008, our first deployment occurred. Now, the interesting thing here is that if you're wondering or curious about having to get legal review and doing some kind of action on your part to participate, every fire department in the state of Texas is included in the TIFMAS program by state legislature. So it doesn't require any agreements for you to sign or to try to negotiate or have to worry about going through a legal review. Everyone by default is included in the TIFMAS program. Certainly, the way you opt out is you just don't participate or you don't request the assistance. So it's pretty simple in that fashion. And that's really helped us be able to onboard new departments anytime they have a desire or have a need. Now, the program itself is operated through the Texas A&M Forest Service. We have a little bit of interaction with them. They have 1 or 2 employees that are kind of assigned to the TIFMAS program to assist us. But the program itself is actually staffed and run by firefighters across the state of Texas. All of the branch coordinators that we may mention, some of them, Chief Johnson and I both serving as 2 of the 8 across the state, as well as a statewide state coordinator. We're all just fire chiefs or firefighters in local departments somewhere that are giving of our time to be coordinators. And when we actually deploy folks out into the field, it's your firefighters or firefighters from your neighbors or firefighters from 600 miles away, all from within the state of Texas. So it's always staffed by local firefighters. The other thing at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the white bar. That is our stakeholder group. So the TIFMAS program isn't managed or decisions made by the state coordinator or even the 8 branch coordinators. That group of stakeholders comes together and makes decisions, oftentimes at recommendation of what we've experienced in the field. But that stakeholder group is really the one that drives the program. So if changes are needed, those stakeholder groups help us sort through the best way to approach those changes and what's really possible to be done out in the field. So that's the Texas Firefighters and Fire Marshals Association, the Texas Fire Chiefs Association, the Texas A&M Forest Service, the Texas Department of Public Safety, which is now part of the Texas A&M system, the Texas Division of Emergency Management, or TDEM, as you'll hear us refer to them, the Texas State Association of Firefighters, and the Texas Commission on Fire Protection. Those are our stakeholder groups. And again, they're the ones that actually make decisions about how we deploy, what the rules are, how we engage, how we reimburse. All of those efforts are done by that coordinated stakeholder group. Let's go to our next slide. And so this slide, as Clay so aptly handled in our introduction, the TIFMAS program is not just wildfire. Now, while we started off as wildfire, we all know that the fire service in Texas is well known for not just focusing on one thing, but whenever there is a need, the fire service responds. TIFMAS is no different than that. So we are an all risk, all hazard statewide response, and it is mutual aid. So we handle things like hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes, floods, other kind of fire department support, and then the great other box as you see on the screen. And really that's no different than any job you've ever worked where they set other duties as assigned. The TIFMAS program has one of those too. We've done some very peculiar and strange things. Some of those I'll cover here in just a few minutes on another slide. But just suffice it to say, the TIFMAS program embodies the concept of the entire Texas Fire Service, which is when you need help, we're here to help you. On our next slide, you'll see us identify just slightly the roles that we take on. So the local fire departments are what we call the initial and extended attack forces. It's a little bit of wildland kind of language. What it really means is the local fire departments are the ones that make the initial response. They go respond to the incident and start working it. And when they are I don't want to say overwhelmed, that may not sound nice, but when they get to a point where their resources can't keep up with the incident, we've all been there. We've all had to ask for help. And if there's a department out there that hasn't had to ask for help, they will in the future. It's just a given. The odds are always in that favor, that there's always going to be something that every department can't handle on their own, and they're going to need some help. So in those instances, the Texas Forest Service is usually the first one to come in for extra support. Sometimes that's someone showing up, the regional fire coordinator may show up and assess, what does the incident look like? What do your resources look like? And how much more help can you get from your neighbors? Once we kind of move past that point where your department's resources and your neighboring departments are still not going to be sufficient resources to handle the incident, then the Forest Service may call in for other help. And I think a slide just before this one talks about TIFMAS being what we call the ready reserve. So TIFMAS is really that the bullpen, if you want to use a baseball analogy. TIFMAS is the statewide mutual aid neighbor for you. You get activated through the TIFMAS program by the Texas A&M Forest Service and through TDM, the Division of Emergency Management. So TIFMAS is there to help you once the Forest Service arrives, takes a look, or they understand that your resources are already stretched thin and you need more help. They help us activate TIFMAS and get us out the door to come help you. The federal and state agencies are the ones that come and reinforce the Texas A&M Forest Service. So there's kind of a two-prong approach there, where TIFMAS is there to help the local jurisdiction. Federal and state agencies come in to help the state operating through the Texas A&M Forest Service. So that gets us to the next slide. That one is just a quick breakdown of the participants. Now you'll see on the slide, as of January, we actually got updated numbers just at the end of last week, so we didn't try to update the slide presentation to throw a kink in all of the planning we had made. But currently, we have 99 volunteer departments, 108 combination departments, and 117 career departments. And really what's notable about those numbers, number one, that's a lot of departments. Number two, we've got departments that span every type of department out there. All volunteer, combination volunteer and career, or all career departments. You can be a municipal department, you can be an ESD, you can be a contracted service provider. The program for TIFMAS doesn't have a requirement that says you must be of a certain type of department to participate or to receive assistance. We cover them all. TIFMAS is ready to help you. Likewise, the member totals, as you'd imagine, they have increased again just a little bit in the last 6 months. So we're now at 7,128 all-hazard responders and 4,736 wildland-specific responders. And we'll talk about some of those requirements in a couple of slides later. Suffice it to say, there are different requirements if you're going to respond in a wildfire event versus an all-hazards kind of event. There's some different things we do in those environments. So for qualifications, you've got to be an all hazards or structural responder to get the all hazards qualification. You have to be industrial or specialized if you want to do some industrial kind of work. But the good news there is that even departments that are industrial fire departments, we have quite a few of those along the coastline, they are also able to participate in TIFMAS. And then the wildland qualifications, again, are kind of a different pathway to responding out in the field. So in all hazards, to qualify, you have to be SFFMA, the State Firefighters and Fire Marshals Association, accredited firefighter 1, 2, or advanced level. If your department is covered through the Texas Commission on Fire Protection, you need to be qualified at the basic firefighter level. Now, both of those, all those mean is that you've had a certain number of required minimum hours and training and testing that the state, either at the Commission on Fire Protection or Firefighters and Fire Marshals Association, has deemed you qualified to serve as a structural firefighter. That's the basic requirement to respond in an all hazards response for us. On the next slide, you'll just see wildland. In a different version of this presentation, we have a bunch of different boxes there with different colors and all of the different levels of wildland qualification you can attain. That's a little bit more detailed than this presentation is needing. So we just say we do obviously have a wildland response. There are many different qualification levels that have been even some recently added to be able to launch a full-scale, multiple-faceted approach. So it's not just two folks showing up on a fire truck. You're going to get a well-trained, highly qualified team of firefighters that are there that have varying degrees of experience and exposure to what you're actually needing them to do in the field. On the next slide, we kind of break down just a little bit. This is one of the more detailed slides that you'll see tonight. This is just kind of a breakdown of the number of people that are required to respond on different types of apparatus in a wildland deployment. So let me kind of sidestep for just a second. In an all hazards deployment, we will respond whatever type of apparatus or equipment is necessary and appropriate to send on that kind of deployment. In the wildland event, there are still some variations on what kind of equipment you can request or what kind of equipment you may be asked to provide on a deployment. For us, a type 1 or 2 engine is generally your large pumper, so the big red fire truck, or whatever color you may be running in your department. So a type 1 or 2 engine is usually, think of that as the big Class A kind of pumper, big fire truck. A type 3 engine is what I generally call a large frame brush truck. So it's a more of a wildland brush unit, got higher clearance, hauls quite a bit of water, but doesn't do all of the structural kind of work that a type 1 or 2 engine would do. The type 6 engine is what I like to call the small frame brush truck. So something more along the lines of a Ford F550 or some of the Dodge or Chevy Duramax kind of vehicles. So a smaller frame brush truck, your typical 4-wheel drive, has less water on it than a type 3, and again, lacks the structural fire suppression tools that a type 1 or 2 engine would have. In addition to that, we respond or deploy out strike team or task force leaders. If you're familiar with that, that's typically like a battalion chief role or whoever your command level element is in your department. So if that's a captain or battalion chief, district chief, deputy chief, fire chief, whatever rank you have, that tends to respond out into the field to be in command of the scene, to manage the other trucks and resources that are there. That's what a strike team leader or a task force leader does. You'll see the personnel count there as 1 to 2 people. So they do function very much like a battalion chief or, again, whatever you utilize locally to be in charge of your incident scenes. The other piece of equipment that we tend to deploy and have done so more regularly now is the tender or a tactical tender, as you may hear it called. In the wildland environment, a lot of times we call these kind of trucks a tanker. My department used to call them tankers as well. The problem with the wildland environment is a tanker is typically an aircraft. So in our mode, a water tender is what you may be calling a tanker. So that's just a large truck with a lot of water on it. We're in the thousands of gallon range. A tactical tender hauls that same kind of water, but oftentimes includes more equipment to make them a little bit more multifunctional for us. Oftentimes they can actually float in as a Type 3 type of engine because of the equipment they're carrying. At the bottom of this screen is something in blue, so if your department or your district is interested in participating in TIFMAS, one of the new requirements that's coming up that stakeholder group put in place effective January 1st of 2021, so just in another 6 months, what's called the Arduous Work Capacity Test, or the PAC test, is going to be required before your folks can deploy on a wildland assignment. So what that means is if you're going out to fight a wildland fire, your folks need to have taken and passed the PAC test. We won't get into super details on that, but suffice it to say, it's a good measure of physical ability to be able to get out and do the job or the task that we're being asked to do when we're deployed. So you put on a weighted vest or pack. You have to walk, not jog, not run, 3 miles within 45 minutes with a 45-pound pack on, or again, a weighted vest. Those are all done at the local jurisdiction level. So again, your department would be self-certifying your own personnel that they have met and passed that requirement. On our next slide then, we don't toot our horn much. We have a hard time doing that in the fire service. But we do just to give you some idea of what this program is capable of doing. So the TIFMAS program for the wildland type of deployment, we go back to 2011. That was a pretty significant fire season for us in the state. TIFMAS had 30 different strike teams deployed across the state of Texas. And I didn't actually cover this in the previous slide. A strike team consists of at least 5 vehicles, 5 apparatus, plus the strike team leader. So when we say 30 strike teams, we mean that's a minimum of 6 vehicles per strike team. So you do some quick math, you see that we're around 180 pieces of equipment that were mobilized and deployed throughout the state of Texas in one single day in 2011. That may not seem like a lot, but I guarantee you if they're coming to your jurisdiction, there's probably not enough road miles to put all those trucks on them end to end. It's a significant amount of resources. And I really have no doubt to tell you that if we needed to deploy that number or greater today, we wouldn't have any challenge doing so. The TIFMAS program, because of how it's built and because it's statewide in nature, we can help mobilize those resources from all across the state to help get you the resources you need. The next slide then gets us out of the wildland environment, and there was this little hurricane called Harvey that kind of bumped up against the coast a couple of years ago. We deployed 985 people on 296 pieces of apparatus or equipment down to the Gulf Coast. Those are folks, again, coming from all across the state. So in the all hazards environment, we've already proven there again, we've got the capacity to put a lot of people at it. Now, if you just kind of mentally rewind with me for a second, I'm telling you, at Hurricane Harvey, we put almost 1,000 people on the ground deployed to the coast. And if you recall, the all hazards number of qualified or credentialed people in the state of Texas is over 7,000. So again, the message here, not so much that, ooh, look what TIFMAS did, but more so the resources we're able to mobilize and send out the door are still really not totally tapping the resources available in the state, should we have another Harvey-like incident come across. Some of the slides we don't put in here to talk about the other types of responses we do, that other duties as assigned box. We've deployed folks down to the Houston area, some of the refineries, to do hazmat monitoring, hazardous materials monitoring. That was a pretty small scope kind of deployment, but it was very specialized. And so the TIFMAS program not only does structural firefighting or backfill kind of responses, not only does wildland kind of responses, but they do those very specialized things that maybe a local jurisdiction doesn't have resources to perform or just doesn't have the depth to do it for long term. So the TIFMAS program steps in and helps when it's needed. And as you might have guessed, there's this pandemic going on right now. And with the coronavirus, TIFMAS actually deployed folks back in May to help distribute personal protective equipment all throughout the state. I believe we were at 8 different military armories across the state. We had TIFMAS presence in those, assisting with the tracking of personal protective equipment and helping support the testing in the nursing homes across the state. That concluded at the very beginning of June, and now just over the weekend, TIFMAS has yet again redeployed into some of those same armories to assist in very similar fashions. So again, the message here is that TIFMAS is not just wildland. TIFMAS is not just flood or hurricane or tornado or a very large refinery structure fire kind of response. TIFMAS is really anything it needs to be, and that's a great flexibility that lets the Texas Fire Service flex its resource capabilities to go and provide assistance where it's needed. So real quick then on the next slide, it's a little bit of a busy slide, and I apologize for that, but this walks us through a little bit of how the activation actually occurs, the approval levels, and how you may actually request TIFMAS assistance if you have a need in your jurisdiction. So we start in the upper left corner, the local incident commander on an incident. So remember that the local jurisdiction is the initial attack force. They're always the ones there first. They size up their incident, they figure out what kind of other resources they may need, and if they can provide them on their own or with their neighboring departments through their normal, regular mutual aid or automatic aid. Once that incident commander realizes they need even more resources than is readily available to them, they usually run that through their local Emergency Operations Center, or EOC. That's typically a county-based function. If you're in a larger city, obviously you're going to be going through your city emergency planners, etc. But generally speaking, that's a county function. And so your county Emergency Operations Center and Emergency Management Coordinator, which oftentimes may even be the fire chief, that person then gets the request in from the field that says, we need more help and we need it from the state. We've tapped out our own and our neighboring resources, and we still need more help. That request then, generally speaking, from your county, goes up to the district disaster chair or the district captain at the Department of Public Safety, your DPS captain. It's a very high-ranking official in the DPS system. The district disaster chair is also another one of those state positions that basically is your connection into state resources when you need them. They see that request come in from a local emergency operations center or county. They will then push that request, if they approve, and obviously most of the time they're going to, they push that request over to the State Operations Center, or what we call the SOC, the SOC. That is in Austin, which happens to be very near where I'm sitting in my department. But at the SOC, the State Operations Center is run by the Texas Division of Emergency Management, TDEM. They see those requests come in. They evaluate what type of state resource is appropriate and available. And hopefully, most of the time, they see if TIFMAS is requested or that it's a mission that matches what is something that a TIFMAS resource can help with. Then they approve of that request. They then transmit that over to the Texas A&M Forest Service, who also has representation at the State Operations Center. So once the A&M Forest Service receives that request, they make notice to the TIFMAS state coordinator. That happens to be, again, just another fire chief that's in the state of Texas. He's not paid as a state coordinator, and none of the branch coordinators are either. So he receives that request. He makes a decision on which branches, or maybe all of the branches, are going to participate in this deployment. Generally speaking, we try to spread that around, so we're not always using the same branch over and over or the same people over and over. We understand that the experience your folks get when they go deploy is really immeasurable. So we like to make sure that we're not always looking to the same departments or the same branches to always provide a response. So to the extent possible, we're going to kind of rotate that around. So the state coordinator makes that decision. He pushes the information out to a branch coordinator or multiple coordinators to look to fill those resource requests. Again, that's going to be those 5 or 6 trucks that we're looking for per strike team. Your branch coordinator is then going to reach out to the local fire departments in their branch. And we'll have a map here a couple of different times in the presentation that we won't talk much about, but just so that you know what's out there, we have maps that break down the branches into their different geographical areas. Most of those are pretty logical, different blobs on the on the map. Some of them are a little odd shaped, and it makes our makes our activations a little bit more challenging sometimes when we realize how far we've got to go. But the advantage there is really we have the ability to reach across many different counties and many different localities to be able to get you the resources you need and that you're looking for. So once those fire departments have been contacted by their branch coordinator, we run that information back to the Texas A&M Forest Service Emergency Operations Center. They have their own. And that's where we get our resource orders issued, and that's when it's time to have trucks start hitting the road and get on the way to go provide the assistance they need to provide. So on your screen now is still the map of the branch resource coordinators. The state coordinator is listed separately up in the upper left. But you'll see we've got 8 different branches across the state. Again, we'll talk more about that later. If I could, as I'm about to pass off my part of the presentation over to Chief Johnson to take the rest of the presentation. If there's one thing I could encourage you to do is to take a look at this map, get very familiar with who your branch resource coordinator is, and make sure they know that you're out there and that you're interested in participating. If you're interested just in making sure you're able to receive TIFMAS assistance, it's really pretty simple. Make sure you've got contact into your local county emergency management folks. Again, that could be the fire chief, that could be the county judge, to make sure that they know the process. So if you need more help than what your own department or your neighboring departments can provide, you want to know that you can reach out to those folks and ask them to put in a request for a TIFMAS response. If you just ask for a couple of fire trucks, some folks may kind of scratch their head and not really know where to start looking. If you use the word TIFMAS, it makes it much easier for the folks that are seeing that a little bit upstream of you to know, oh, we know exactly what they're looking for. They're looking for certain types of fire truck equipment, and it's coming through that TIFMAS program that we know exactly how they're going to roll out the door and come help. So just a little hint of information. So 2 things then. Number 1, if you're looking for help to come to you, get very familiar with your local folks to know how to put those requests in and get them into the state so they can be routed up to us and we can get out the door and going out to help you. If you're interested in participating, make sure you've got a good contact for your branch resource coordinator so they know you're ready and you're able to help, so they know to reach out to you when it's time to deploy. And Chief Johnson, I think I'm going to pass off to you now. And folks, I'll still be on the line, so if you have questions toward the end, Chief Johnson or I, either one, will be ready to answer them. But for now, I'll pass the torch over to Chief Johnson, and I'll be quiet for a few moments. Thank you.
All right, Chief, thank you. So through the TIFMAS program, fire departments that are eligible through the TIFMAS program that don't participate in the 2604 have the ability to do a grant apparatus or training. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about the grant apparatus. So every year there's a ranking schedule if you apply for an apparatus, and depending on what region is getting funded and what type of apparatus is coming available. So for my own organization, we have a TIFMAS Type 3 apparatus. We applied for it, and they did a scoring criteria on different items and produced a score. And then if our region was funded, we were able to get it. So when I went to talk to my commissioners about the whole TIFMAS program and the possibility of getting an apparatus, I explained it to them that they will give us the apparatus. It'll become fully equipped. When they need it, they will turn around and rent it back from us. And then if we need to use it as a reserve apparatus, it is available for a local response. So my commissioner's response is can we get 2 of them at that deal? Because, like I said, it is an apparatus that you have local ability to use, not as a first out apparatus, but as a secondary or immediate mutual aid. And then when the state wants it, they turn around and rent it back from you. So the apparatus is owned by the fire department. Once they grant it to you, that becomes your apparatus. And then there's also training available at the $200,000 mark. So you can apply from anything from wildland training to structural training, driver apparatus training. I've seen a couple of those get funded. So through the TIFMAS program, there's $200,000 worth of training. So we talk a little bit about apparatus, and here's kind of a visual idea. So your type 3 is the top right apparatus. This is your big brush truck. In my agency, this is the apparatus we have, and as a fire chief, we never owned one of these apparatuses, and none of our neighboring departments own one either. But after having this apparatus for several years, when it is time for us to replace, if TIFMAS is unable to fund it, we will buy one ourselves, because it is such a versatile apparatus, and it'll handle both the wildland atmosphere and the structural protection. And then in the middle on your left-hand side, we have the tactical tanker, and I believe that might be College Station's tactical tanker. So in my area, a lot of tankers don't have the ability to pump and roll. A tactical tanker has the ability to pump and roll, has the little monitor in the front, and then carries a very similar equipment load to the Type 3 apparatus. So one of the big things that we've used over the years on the tactical tankers is they're required to carry a portable pump. So when we're out in West Texas, we have the ability to hit some stock ponds and some other things and pump water out of those to continue our water supply. And then we get down to the Type 6, as Chief Wittig said earlier. It's your typical F550, F350 chassis, and those are spread out through the state of Texas. So here's a breakdown of our engine locations. So you kind of see that they're scattered and matching the regions. We're a little light on apparatus out in the West Texas, El Paso area, and that's strictly because our participatory fire departments just aren't there yet. If we could find a fire department out there that had the depth and the willingness to take an apparatus, we would love to get out there so we can do a response. So if you look at your map here, little red dots are departments with one engine. And when we say engine, that could be a tanker or anything like that. We just consider the tactical tender an engine for this part. And then the areas with blue are areas with two engines. The areas that typically have the two engines, so in my area, I can tell you it's Galveston is the fire department that has two apparatus of TIFMAS. One is an original Forest Service truck, the old green Forest Service truck that they rolled out of service through a surplus item. And then you have a couple other ones that have dual apparatus. Austin has two, but not that many apparatus departments run dual apparatus. So we do have the ability to deploy wildland caches. So cache is just that. It is a whole bunch of loose equipment. So depending on what area is requesting the cache, we have the ability to send you that. So if you're in the West Texas area and you've got plenty of firemen, or what we've had seen on a couple of issues is our firemen are just tearing up the equipment because they're that busy that they're in the thorns, or we're breaking shovels because we're hitting rocks and stuff. So instead of having to go to the local hardware store and try to place an order for shovels, or fire shelters is the big one, we have the ability to deploy these caches, and they're strategically located in different parts of the state. So Nacogdoches has the ability to outfit 100 personnel, the Midland region 25, and Austin 100, and McKinney 25. Like I said, these are strictly equipment based. If you just call and say, hey, we have a large wildfire and we have plenty of personnel on scene, but we need some additional PPE, we're able to deploy these trailers to bring you PPE and some hand tools. So how to participate in the TIFMAS program. So we have our individual departments, and those we really look at it as an individual department is that you don't have a TIFMAS asset. So that in this particular site, it's the white apparatus there. So you're willing to send one of your personal vehicles as far as department owned. So, and that goes back to the same thing as I said earlier. So depending on the type of apparatus is requested is how the reimbursement schedule works. We follow the FEMA reimbursement schedule. So there's different money available for a Type 1 engine versus a Type 6. So that's the individual departments. And then you have the participating departments, and that is more of your TIFMAS asset. So you're going to deploy a TIFMAS asset instead of one of the ones that was originally paid for with local taxpayers' money. So how to participate. As Chief Wittig talked about earlier, we have different qualifications. We have the all hazards. So that's your structural. We have your industrial. As we said earlier, you have your, we did hazmat monitoring, your basic wildland. So this is one of the weird things that follows more of the national wildland standard than what we're used to in the state fire marshals and fire marshal association in TCFP. Basic wildland FF2 versus a wildland firefighter 1. It's kind of backwards from us. So in the commission world, a basic wildland 2 is your Texas Commission on Fire Protection basic wildland certification. And then you have your engine operator, your basic faller. So this is somebody who has demonstrated skills in using a chainsaw, dropping trees and brush. And then your wildland firefighter type 1 is somebody who's gone through an S-130, 190 class, and that's through the NWCG required training, and that has completed their task book. So on the commission side, if you have your basic wildland certification, you can get your FF2, but until you complete a task book, you're ineligible for the firefighter 1. Exact same classes, but it's the classes plus the task book. And the task books are something that are kind of unique to the wildland side, and a lot of departments struggle on that. And that basically shows not only have you completed the class, but you've demonstrated some competency in doing it. So operating a portable pump, I didn't just learn about it in the class. I've actually used it on a fire, and somebody who has those qualifications have checked off that, yes, I know how to use a portable pump. So that way, when we send you somebody to West Texas, you know you're getting a qualified individual. And then we have the engine boss, which is, for our intents and purposes, of the municipal world, apparatus. Team leader, this is another qualification that will take you several years to get. Marching through the process, you start off as a FF1 ITC, and then you can go to engine boss, and then you go to strike team leader, and then strike team leader and task force leader are similar, interchangeable, depending on the mission. And then a division group supervisor is the next level up. So on a large wildfire or a large all hazards response, you're responsible for a large geographical area. So why participate? How many of your firemen were around in 2011 that got a chance to see the state of Texas in that type of wildfire environment? I know prior to 2011, my organization didn't see that type of fire. And then really after 2011, without our TIFMAS assignments, we haven't seen that style of fire in the state of Texas. So by us sending firefighters to these deployments, I'm gaining expertise that we wouldn't see in our local jurisdiction. So when it happens here, we have some seasoned firemen that not only are able to draw on their practical knowledge, but also their book knowledge, and they got a very good idea of, hey, this fire is going to crown or it's going to run on us, and those type of things, because they've seen it. They haven't just read about it in the textbook. To do this level of training, you can't put a price on it to be able to go out in West Texas or the panhandle areas that we've seen some large fires and learn from some of the people that are out there on these large events. And then also on the all hazards is being able to ramp up and run an all hazards experience. So you're able to kind of practice on a deployment, and then you have the experience when it happens here in your local jurisdiction. So how does a deployment work? So typically our deployments are a minimum of 7 days, and then crews can extend beyond the 7-day mark. So if you deploy, we ask that you guarantee a crew a 7-day window. It makes it logistically a challenge for us if units from Porter in West Texas, then at day 3, I need to change somebody out. That's very hard for us to do, to get people out there. So we ask that you guarantee us a minimum of 7 days. And then at the 7-day mark, if you need to exchange your personnel, we can arrange that. And then most of the time, the crews that are deployed typically want to stay the additional 14 days. One, logistically, it's a challenge to do crew exchanges, and two, the crews are enjoying what they're doing. So we tell our crews on all responses they need to be self-sufficient for 3 days. So when we come into your area, we're not going to be a burden on your resources, because most of the time you barely have enough to take care of what you've got going on. So we'll show up with tents, MREs. We're probably going to need some help on diesel, but we can pitch a tent. We sleep on the fire ground. We've done it in parks. If we can find a hotel, that's great. It's a little nicer, but at the end of the day, if tents are where we need to be, then tents are where we need to be, and we're self-sufficient for the 3-day mark. So reimbursement, that's always the big deal when we're talking with our commissioners and on how do we make sure the districts become whole. So they are portal to portal. So what does portal to portal mean? So the moment you leave your response area to the moment you get back, you're on the clock. So for us, I'll use us as an example. Firefighter leaves, they're able to get 2 hours worth of prep time to get their apparatus ready, make sure they have the bedding and all the saws and everything are right. And then they deploy, and then when they come back, they're on the clock that whole time as far as the personnel goes. And then when they get back, they get 2 additional hours to put the apparatus back in service. Now, your vehicles are on a as-used basis. So if you only use the vehicle for 10 hours, the state will reimburse you at the rate in the business manual for the 10 hours. That does not include fuel. So if it's $65 an hour, that is included your fuel expense in that. So departments will need to have a credit card when they send somebody to go to be able to buy the fuel and bedding or any other expenses. So they also pay for backfill when you have a minimum staffing policy in life. So if you say in your staffing policy a deployment will not adversely affect your home agency, that means if you have 2 firefighters on the A shift deployed, then TIFMAS will reimburse you 2 backfill positions to cover that spot. So you're not short on your local response. So your citizens are not seeing a negative impact because you have 5 crew members deployed. You're able to backfill those spots, and the TIFMAS program will reimburse you for the backfill. So as an agency, you're whole. So we've put some thought into this. So if the A shift guy returns and it's their shift the next immediate day, well, they're probably pretty tired from being on a 14-day assignment. So if their shift falls immediately to their return, TIFMAS will cover a 24-hour backfill for that person also to make sure we get a proper rest. Per diem, so we do cover per diem at the local agency's guidelines. So I can speak on our behalf. We follow the GSA rate, so that's the General Service Administration. When our crews know when they deploy, we typically look up where they're going and tell them, here, this is what the state of Texas will reimburse for meals, and this is what they'll try to do for hotels. The hotel is kind of as an as-needed basis. When we were in West Texas 2 years ago during the oil field boom, one of our assignments, we changed hotels 4 times in 14 days because we could not stay in one hotel because of the oil field boom and just couldn't get there. And we exceeded the state rate every single day. Typically, those will get with the agency coordinator, and they approve us to break those rates. And then the per diem, you can, if you choose not to use per diem, you can do it where the department pays for everything on a department credit card. With that said, is when you do the reimbursement process, you must show that the agency has paid off that credit card bill. So typically that adds a little bit of a delay on the reimbursement, because depending on when that crew gets back, you have to wait 30 days for your credit card bill to come in. Then you have to process it. So that might create a little bit of a delay in your window, opposed to the per diem. As soon as the crews get back, you're not required to have receipts on the per diem. they were gone for 7 days times the per diem rate. Here's the check cut. You put a copy of the check that you produced when you reimbursed the employee into your file, and you can move a little bit faster on your reimbursements. So how do you know all this information about how do I get reimbursed? What's the rate schedule? What are the staffing levels? The TIFMAS has a business manual that's kind of our rule book for all of our deployments, reimbursement schedules, qualifications. So when I talked about earlier about the apparatus rate, so you have $70, your type 3s are very similar to 70.33, so it's exactly. And then there are a couple in here that are based off of pump capacity. So the tender, it's based off pump capacity. The ladder, if you see a range there, that's the same thing. It's based off of the ladder height, the pump capacity, and there's a couple other things. Very similar to the boat rate is based off of the capacity of the boat. If for some reason we're calling a Boston whaler to help out on a lake versus the 2-man inflatable is the rate differences on there. So when it comes to personnel for the career departments, it's actually the actual cost. So when we do your reimbursement schedule or you submit the worksheet to the state, it's the salary, it's the overtime, it's all your fringe benefits. So it's your health care, it's the retirement system. If you have any contractually obligated stipulations based off of your contracts with your union or workforce, whatever there is, it's career actual cost. So your agency stays whole the whole process. And then if you're a volunteer organization, we just set a flat rate at the $14 an hour for your volunteer rate. So reimbursement, how does it work? So you'll get notification that your agency was deployed. You get what's called a STAR request, and that's kind of the start of the documentation trail. So you do your deployment, your crews complete their 214s, which is timesheets, basically, and a little bit of a unit log. And you want to make sure that your unit logs match your timesheet. So you can say Carter Johnson worked did 24 hours on this day and was on the line from 0700. We started our truck check. 0800 did incident briefing. 0830 I was on the line. So you want to kind of do some basic paperwork as far as what your personnel did and then the hours your apparatus actually worked. You get all that back into your home agency, and they complete a workshop, a workbook that the state sends you, where you plug all your numbers in, and you basically generate an invoice, and you send that to TDM. TDM reviews it and says, yes, this expense is eligible, this expense is not eligible. So, and then make sure your hours matched what you put in. And they're great to work with. It's not an adversary relationship we have with TDM. A lot of times they've actually come back and said, hey, Chief, you're leaving some additional money on the table by not claiming this. In the past, we used to say that some of these worksheets were a little challenging to do. And then they actually walked us through to make sure that we got these worksheets done and were able to reimburse. So some great additional funds there that made our agency whole, if not just a slightly ahead when it comes to the apparatus. It goes to the governors for audit, the governor's office, and then their payment goals within 90 days. That's 90 days from when you submit the information. So if you drag your feet and you take 60 days to submit, they're not going to reimburse you in 30 days. That's 90 days from when you submit the information. Now, my ESD, got to understand that, okay, during 2011, think about how many agencies were deployed. Right now with COVID, think about how many disaster levels. And so the goal is there for 90 days. You do need to have a plan to what happens if you don't get reimbursed in the same budget year. That's happened to us where we've submitted some stuff late in our budget year and we don't get reimbursed until the following budget. We've always been made whole. My district has been very happy with the process, but sometimes they do fall in from when you actually incur the expense that when you get reimbursed is beyond your budget year, and it does sometimes run longer than the 90-day mark. But they've been great to work with. So as we brought up the branch coordinators, you can look on here and kind of see where we all are. And TIFMAS is the ready reserve of the state of Texas. It's kind of, in case of emergency, break glass type situation, and we're ready to respond.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chief Johnson and Chief Wittig, for your presentation. We just have a little bit of time to go through a couple questions real quickly. And then we'll get everybody their credit hours. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Chief Johnson, if you'll stop the screen share for a moment so we can kind of go to a gallery view here. Okay, let me run through a couple things. Well, first, a clarification. I have an admission. You know, I'm one of those people who just kind of associates or associated TIFMAS with wildland fire and wildfire response. That's why during my intro I brought up tornadoes, and then for some reason I tried to talk myself out of it. That's not true. Chief Wittig, as you mentioned, that TIFMAS is an all-hazard response mechanism, so you guys respond to all sorts of disasters that our first responder firefighters would be involved with, and you've probably seen a lot of those kind of things. So I just wanted to clarify that after my terrible intro, which we'll probably have to edit out. And the lesson is always, you know, I should think more and talk less. So let's get on to a couple questions here. What's the level required for activation? Is there a threshold that a jurisdiction has to clear to request TIFMAS help, or is it just sort of at any point?
No, sir. There's not a stated threshold. The kind of the unwritten rule is you need to have exhausted your own mutual aid capabilities, right? That's what the state's going to look for when they see what you're asking for. One of the questions they should be asking is, have you already asked your neighbors for help? That's really the only threshold. I'm not aware of anybody that's calling and double checking you've asked your neighbors first. I think it'll be apparent to them when you submit something and they already know there's multiple departments working on it. Right.
So like Chief Johnson said, it's kind of a breaking case of glass kind of thing. But you know, you exhaust your resources at home and your mutual aid options, and then if that's not enough, TIFMAS is there for you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I just want to clarify, if you're looking for assistance, it's important to go through the county emergency management system, your local EOC. I think it's important to stress to everyone out there in the ESD world to know your local emergency management officials and how that goes up, because they're the ones who will get you to your disaster district commanders or coordinators with TDEM, and that's how that process gets started. Am I understanding correctly?
That is correct.
Okay, good.
Yes, really an important factor there too, Clay, is a lot of times when you know you've talked to your branch coordinator from TIFMAS, Chief Johnson, me, any of the other ones, we don't have a way to deploy people or activate the system for you, right? So we're on the other end of that loop. So if you call your local branch coordinator, me, Chief Johnson, whoever's in your branch, it's a nice heads up that you got something going on, but we don't have a mechanism to actually send that information into the state and get that deployment started. So you really got to work through your local emergency management folks. Again, your county judge, whoever that may be for you.
Right. A lot of counties have their county judge as their local EMC. Some have an actual office working there for the county. Okay. And if you want to participate, though, it's important to talk to your branch coordinator, right? If you're looking to participate in TIFMAS.
Correct. So the way we'll typically get a assignment is we'll kind of know where we're going, and then through the state coordinator we'll say, South Central branch, it's your turn to go, or you can meet our time frame of when we need to have crews there. So I'll send a mass email out to all of my participating agencies that have told me they want to participate TIFMAS in the South Central branch and say, all right, I have a request for 4 type 3s, 2 type 6s. And they email back and say, yeah, Chief, we're able to fulfill that request, or hey, because of COVID, or hey, we've got a paramedic class going on, we can't fulfill that request. We just roll it to the next person in line that says, yes, I'm willing to help and I can meet the deployment window.
So you guys kind of keep a list going of those departments that have contacted you and also kind of been vetted for deployments, right?
Correct.
Well, with that, I want to go to a question that was actually asked in the chat. How would you characterize ESD participation in the TIFMAS system? Would you say there's a lot of ESDs participating? Is it something that ESDs could probably do more of, get involved with if they're capable?
I'm going to take a guess because as far as I know, I don't know that anybody's tracking it that specifically. But the couple of times we've been mindful of that and looked at who's actually deployed and responding, I think there's a lot more ESDs participating than we realize. And some of that is some of the smaller cities that we see deploy oftentimes are ESDs. We just don't realize it because they're just using their local name. So if you're with Oak Hill Fire Department, that may not mean anything until you understand, oh, they're an ESD. Right. Porter Fire Department, okay, well, they're coming out of Porter. Oh, but they're an ESD. So I think there's a lot more ESDs participating than most people realize. But certainly there's room for more. That's always the statement to be made.
Let me ask a question about that. Chief Johnson, you had the list of qualifications. Just so I'm clear, is that a checklist that the department has to have all of those things? Someone check all those boxes?
So it depends on the mission you're doing. So if you want to be just an all hazards fire department, so if you want to say, hey, if there's a tornado or a flood and we want to respond, that's up to the local agency to say you're qualified. So that's either State Fire Marshal Association, Texas Commission on Fire Protection, or on the industrial side, meeting some of the NFPA requirements. And now once you move into the wildland side, it's a little more detailed and specific on classes. So depending on what level you're trying to get, so your basic wildland, which in the wildland world, a firefighter 2 is a basic. So that means you've either completed the State Fire Marshal training or the Texas Commission on Fire Protection, and their equivalency of the S-130-190, which is a National Wildfire Group class. And then once you've completed that and completed your task book, then you become a firefighter 1. So it's a little bit different than what we're used to as firefighter 2 versus firefighter 1 and the wildland side. And that's really when you start doing the checklist of, on the wildland side, is I've had my S-130, my S-190, and I've completed my task book, is really where your basic qualifications are. And we specify that on the deployment. So if you're going to send a type 6 apparatus, you must have at least one FF1 firefighter on that apparatus. And our goal is, as we continue to get depth, is we'll eventually roll up to, hey, we want at least 1, 2, and maybe 3 down the line. But right now we get at least 1, so we have a qualified individual, and the rest are trainee positions to make sure that you have depth, because a 6-acre fire or a median fire really is not the type of fire we want you to use in your task book. We want you to have a chance to get out there and experience some 40 to 100-acre fires to be able to put those in your task book. So when we send somebody to West Texas, we know this is not the first time they've seen a large-scale disaster.
Right. I think I understand. It's you have to clear certain levels that you require, but I didn't want somebody to see that checklist and it discouraged their participation if they didn't have all of someone in their department with all of those different classifications.
No, and the TIFMAS, because it's firefighters helping firefighters, I can tell you my agency on a constant basis goes to the neighboring fire department and helps them sign off on their task books because they don't have the individuals. And that's the nice thing about what we do in the state of Texas is we're always helping each other.
Awesome. One last question before I wrap. On the 26, you talked about the grants. Chief Johnson, with the 2604, what kind of departments are not eligible for the 2604?
It is based off of the number of staffing you have, and I can't remember. I want to say it's 15 full-time personnel or more, but I'm not positive on that. Chief Wittig, do you know the exact number?
It's 20.
20.
20 paid firefighters puts you out of the 2604 eligibility.
And just, I wanted to make sure and reiterate, I was using this as a segue. 2604 is what is termed Volunteer Firefighter Assistance Grant through, I think, the Forest Service, right? 2604 was the House bill that they passed allocating that money. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about 2604. And I just want to thank you guys for reinforcing the line there. So thanks, guys. Thank you both for this presentation. We've got to go ahead and wrap up, but that was wonderful. I really appreciate all that information.